Okay. I didn't see Aaron online. Is he, did you speak to him or hear if he's online? Okay. Well, Lori, can I ask you to tape it then?
Yeah, it's recording. The
Okay, good.
recording has started.
Good, good. Okay, well, we are somewhere in the Twilight Zone. I don't know how many of you heard of the Twilight Zone with Rod Serling. I grew up with that. We are somewhere towards the end of the Biden regime and somewhere before the Trump regime. And the news here in Israel basically is that we have a very, very nasty feeling that President Biden is going to do an Obama on us, meaning a call for a United Nations meeting and they get Israel condemned, which will lead to other things. So we're really hoping, we're doing everything we can to behave like good boys and hoping that we will not have a problem with the United Nations because Obama did that to us when he was just before leaving the White House. Um, I don't know. I shouldn't say this, but indeed, Biden is probably the worst president Israel ever had to deal with regarding Israel. You could say also Obama. And so, meanwhile, we're doing the best to receive all the armaments from the United States that were promised to us and have been held up for who knows until when. I think Biden is probably going to hold on to the weaponries until 2 days before he leaves office. So we really have to be ready for whatever. Hamas is not playing ball. Hamas is supposedly Hamas. Qatar is saying one thing. Hamas on the ground in Gaza is not saying anything, basically, just constantly promising things and then not delivering. So, Israel is just kind of biding its time and watching very carefully, especially because of the new terror risk arising with Turkey. Turkey is now the new problem replacing Iran. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but it seems that there's a violence, almost a war taking place now between Pakistan and Afghanistan, with Iran right next door because of all these refugees, Sunni Taliban refugees that are flocking to Iran. Um, Very, very literally, the whole area there is about to explode. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. Um, the Turkish-backed ISIS terrorists who are trying to show the world that they are legitimate and they want peace. So now they're demanding that Israel withdraw uh, completely from the demilitarized zone that we occupied with the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime. Um, I don't know if it's true or not, but I got a message today that Bashar al-Assad is in Moscow, supposedly trying to enjoy his escape, his asylum. And they said today that he was choking to death, probably poisoned. Who's going to poison him in Moscow? Russians. The Russians are very good at that, by the way, poisoning people in Moscow. Um, I think probably uh, they figured that Bashar al-Assad is of no more use to anyone. So why should the Russian government have to pay for his upkeep? His wife is sick with cancer. I feel bad about anyone being sick with cancer. So she's divorcing her husband. These are little details you watch and you wonder to yourself, what is awaiting Israel here? Um, the Turks are in the background. Their troops are already on the Israeli border. The Israelis are saying, we're ready to make peace, but if you ask us to withdraw from the demilitarized zone with the change of regimes, that's not going to happen. Um, and now it's up to the new Syrian government, backed by the Turks, to show that they're serious about making peace with Israel. Um, I don't know. Things are very much in the air. The Druze are very silent because the Druze pretty much know that they are protected by Israel. They don't want to return to the suzerainty of Syria. The Kurds, it seems the Turks have backed off a little bit from attacking the Kurds because the only intention of the Turks is to annihilate the Kurds, was genocide. Everybody talks about Israel with genocide when there is no genocide. And then when there is genocide between the Turks and the Kurds, nobody talks about it. So, we are watching all these things. We're wondering to ourselves what's going to happen now in the winter with Europe. Europe is suffering from a very, very big wave of influenza. Who knows what else? We don't know if they will get their oil from Russia or from whom. The Russians are cutting up the cables underneath the Baltic Sea. Uh, Very strange things are happening, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the president-elect Trump. I'm confident about Trump. What I'm not confident about is what traps are the Democrats laying to maybe try to make sure that Trump doesn't come to power. We have here in Israel also, the left is trying to do things to overthrow Netanyahu. It's been like this for 4 years already with these crazy left-wing people, part of the deep state. And so will Trump be able to outmaneuver the deep state in Washington? So we have two big leaders, Trump and Netanyahu, facing off against the deep state. And so we have the deep state in Israel, we have the deep state in the US. It'll be interesting to see. I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. And so we're all here in Israel just waiting to see. Trying to think to myself, I really don't see too much else happening. I will say that Egypt is preparing for war with Israel. Egypt has nobody else to prepare for war with, but they are digging. They're doing their earthworks, digging not tunnels, digging blockade type formations in the desert so that the Israeli tanks cannot attack Egypt. Israel has no plan to attack Egypt, except if we're attacked, but since it is, I think, inherently obvious that Egypt is preparing for war with Israel. So, we have to really buckle down and finish the problem with Gaza. With all the pain regarding the 100 hostages, I think we have to think more about 10 million Israeli citizens and not about 100 hostages. If we can get the hostages out, great. But we have a problem. We have a problem with the Egyptians. We have the problem with the Turks. We have the problem with the Hamas still. The 60-day ceasefire with South Lebanon with Hezbollah looks like it's going to be extended by another 60 days because as we kind of expected, Hezbollah is not keeping its side of the bargain, and the Lebanese army is simply not capable of doing what has to be done. And like I said before, with Syria, the Turkish-backed HTS is we'll have to see what's going to happen with them. I don't know. We're still just, it's like the quiet before the storm. And same applies to Yemen and the Houthi rockets being fired at us. So all I could say, praise God, is that we are not losing human casualties to the Houthis. We do have the problem with the Palestinian terrorism in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and what's happening in Gaza. So the Israeli military is wrestling with the problem little by little. We'll see what happens. Any questions? I want to add also, as we spoke about last week, the Iranian situation is not good. The Iranian government has not been doing anything to prepare for what's happening now, which is the electrical shortages and the lack of drinking water in Iran. The people are very, very angry, very upset with the Iranian government that they spend so much money propping up the proxies, but they don't take care of the people, the Iranian people. So we're going to have to watch that too. Um, the good side of everything is that we see the light at the end of the tunnel with the new Republican administration coming in. If it comes in, I hope it does. Um, the nightmare 4 years of Biden's office is something we have been managing to avoid the landmines set up by the Democrats, and we are pretty much moving ahead. Uh, I think we're going to see some good developments in the next 2 weeks.
Avi, you had said that the Turks are not attacking some of the Kurds and so on, some of the people that they would have. Your opinion, please, on whether you think that's related to, I forget the fella's name, the head of the Syrian opposition, the way that he's positioning himself to be a moderate or a man of peace and so on. Do you think the Turks are in line with him?
Yes, it's the quiet before the storm. It's the quiet before the storm. You see, the thing with incoming President Trump is that Turkey is actually part of NATO, and Trump is developing his own theories regarding what should happen with NATO. So the Turks are very, very considerate about not rocking the boat too much. On the other side, the Kurds are banking on Israeli support to fight the Turks if the Turks come in to attack and create a genocide with the Kurds. Don't forget, you have very big Kurdish populations in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. So we're talking about 40 to 50 million Kurds. So the Turks, I don't know what they're thinking that they're going to be able to do, but if you look at the map, maybe I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe 300 miles from the Kurdish province. If the Kurds are able to get an air route over eastern Syria from the Kurdish area to Israel, then there's nothing preventing the Kurds from declaring independence. The problem right now is that there is no air route. The Kurds are isolated, so they would be depending upon Israel to have an air outlet to the Mediterranean Sea in order to have some kind of a viable Kurdish country. But the Kurds definitely do not want to be under the Syrian rule. They don't want to be under the Turkish rule. They're kind of okay with the Iraqis, but also not good, and definitely not under Iranian rule. So there's more and more talk of minorities in Iran rising up and against the Iranian regime, and the Kurds are one of the main oppositions to the Iranian regime. So much can happen. Uh, Too much Cracker Jacks here. Anything can happen in the next few days, in the next few minutes. I've noticed many times after I've done these Zoom shows with you guys, there's breaking news immediately after we stop, and everything I said is outdated. Everything has to be really updated again. So we're waiting to see what happens with the Turks.
Avi, could you please talk about Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey? Like, where are the alliances? Who's standing on their own? Who's aligned with who? And all of the above against Israel, but just those four: Russia, China, Turkey, and Iran, please.
Yeah. Well, the Russians are still. I don't want to say they're in a nosedive, but I have heard that tens of thousands of North Korean troops and Russian troops are dying as a result of Ukrainian counteroffensives against the Russians and obviously against the North Koreans. Um, again. Israel, for example, has nothing to do with the war. We are totally neutral in this war. The Ukrainians are fighting valiantly against the Russians, whose military is so corrupt and so backward that the Russians are not winning. The only thing that could save the Russians is if they dump maybe 2 million more Russian and North Korean soldiers as cannon fodder to be chopped up by the Ukrainian military. Um, Regarding the Chinese ostensibly are allies and help the Russians in many ways. But I will say something maybe out of the box. The Chinese are watching, they're rubbing their hands gleefully as they see the Russians collapsing. I think the Chinese at some stage want to redo the map of Russia, Soviet Union. I don't know if the Russians will let them, but the Russians are being ground down by the Ukrainians and the backers of the Ukraine, which is the US and Europe. This is a continuation of the Cold War between Russia and the West. I think the Chinese are thinking to themselves if and when it will be possible to attack and take Taiwan. So we're watching that too. North Korea absolutely is a big tragedy. The Russians obviously are paying Kim Jong-un to send his soldiers into the meat grinder in the Ukraine. Um, I don't know. I would say to all of you who are Republicans, I would say that what Biden has done, maybe not intentionally, but because of his stupidity and his weak international posture, has caused more and more and more the collapse of Russia and more collapse of North Korea, more and more China might have to get involved. I don't really think that the vast majority of Chinese want to get involved in the Russia-Ukraine war. So as long as it's good for the Russian economy, they're helping the Chinese are helping them. I think it's a lost cause. I think that the West, again, it doesn't sound like it, but my understanding as a Sovietologist is that the Russians have lost. And the only question now is how much further can the Russians go like this? The Russians, the North Koreans, Iran is going to fall in 2 or 3 weeks. So Iran is going to have a regime change. Iran is going to become part of the West. It'll be a democratic country. Israel will be one of the closest allies of the new Iran. We'll have to see. Basically, I think China will find itself totally isolated. So I don't think that they're going to attack Taiwan. They may think that America is weak. Many times all these wars happen when people look at America, like with Wilson as president in World War I or Roosevelt as president in World War II. Attacking America has never been a good idea. So I'm pretty confident about the strength of the Western alliances. My only problem is that the Muslims have a big say in what happens with Israel. And so the Biden regime goes with the Muslims. But the point is, going with the Muslims and trying to make Israel look weak brings about a new war, which the Muslims lose. And America loses with them. And Biden has dumped billions of dollars into the treasury of Iran. And the people look all over the world at the weakness of America when it comes to Iran. I think many Americans also don't really understand what Biden and the Democrats are trying to do. But I'm very excited that Trump is returning to the White House. I think we're going to see a very big change in 2 weeks. So we'll see. Again, in a week, 2 weeks from now, we'll have these Zooms, and I may be wrong on so many different things. We'll see what happens with Biden. I just hope Trump assumes the presidency, and we're able to receive new support from the U.S. We are the cutting edge of the U.S. military. We are doing things that American military, I won't say is not capable of doing, but we are the cutting edge knife of Western military. So we shall see. We shall see what happens. I don't know if I answered your question, Lori.
Well, and how
But
about Turkey? Do they stand alone right now in their quest to reestablish the Ottoman Empire?
well, the Turks, from what I read today, have certain equipment and certain technologies which are very low level. But the United States needs the Turks for I think the F-35s. So the United States is kind of going along with the Turks, but the Turkish economy is in the dumps. Uh, it's a lot better than Iran, but the mismanagement and excuse the expression, the mental incapacities of an Islamic government do not allow Turkey to develop a good economy. And as you know, the Iranians, their currency is like 100,000 rials to the dollar. Lebanese currency is down. Syrian currency is down. As terrible as, I say in quotes, as terrible as America is, it's doing a lot better than everybody else. And I think it's one of the reasons why you still see so many outsiders flocking to America to live, because they can't live in the countries in which they live. So Turkey's a mess. I don't know if I'm answering your questions.
No,
If
no,
I'm not,
that's great. So you don't see Turkey as a real threat to Israel?
Turkey, Turkey is a country of almost 100 million people. I would say more dangerous than Turkey is Egypt. Egypt is also 100 million. And they're getting all these arms from the United States, and the only feasible enemy for Egypt is Israel. And the Egyptians are kind of like a rapist waiting for a woman victim to rape, and that's Israel. But they're going to find a black belt karate expert called Israel. Same with the Turks. And I think Turkey is less of an enemy for a simple reason. The Turkish population is 100 million, but 25 million are Kurds who are allied with Israel. 20 million are Shiite Alawites, like in Syria. They're in Turkey. They're also potentially allies of Israel. So right there, about half the population of Turkey is not Turkish. Half the population of Iran is not Iranian. So we really may be seeing a new map of the Middle East at the end of the day. Who's creating the new map? Israel's creating the new map, because the map was created over 100 years ago by the Sykes-Picot Treaty, and the map is worthless. The map has to be completely redrawn. Like I said, I mean, the Druze are in miniature, but the Kurds are they're 40, 50 million people, and they want to break away from the Turks, from the Syrians, from the Iranians, from the Iraqis. Things are going to be very different when all is said and done, I think. Am I answering you, Laurie?
Yes, very interesting about Turkey.
I think I mentioned maybe a number of times on these Zooms that in 1994, I was in Moscow, and I had an interview in Russian with the Radio Moscow. And I said to them, they were flabbergasted. I said, America is not your enemy. Israel is not your enemy, and Europe is not your enemy. The enemy of the Russians for 1,000 years has been the Turks. So you keep your eyes on the Turks. But the Russians are trying to imitate the United States by befriending the Muslims, by doing what Biden has been doing with the Muslims, just to buy them off and have some kind of friendship with them. Moscow is trying to do the same thing, but the Russians have 1,000 years of enmity with these Muslim groups. So again, we're watching that too. I think that the Russian dream all along has been to restore Constantinople instead of Istanbul. So, Russia wants to be the new Rome. Russia wants to be the new Constantinople. So, as a Sovietologist, I say it. The problem with the Russians is their population is also down to about 100 million. And I mean, you look at the Russians; they're very poor people. They're very humble farmers. I mean, they very hard to persuade the Russians to get involved in another war, which has gotten them into so much, like the one that has gotten them into so much trouble in Ukraine. So it's interesting that there are a lot of Muslim volunteers in the Ukraine fighting the Russians. So especially Sunni Muslims who were massacred, slaughtered in the hundreds of thousands by Russian troops and the Sunni Muslim groups. I think the Shiites in Syria and the Christians and now the Druze, there are many of them are very afraid if and when Giuliani wants to create a fanatic Muslim government. What is going to happen to all these minorities in Syria? The Bashar Assad regime was totally based on minorities, and now because of the Turks, the Sunni majority is coming back from exile. So we have to watch that.
Just a comment, Avi, that many 17th century rabbis also confirmed and predicted that Russia would someday come against Turkey as well. So you're in good company, in other words, with that observation.
Well, I don't want to say something which I think would make me completely out of line. But when you consider that half the population of Turkey is either Kurdish and or Shiite, Turkey has a tremendous potential for this being disorganized and breaking apart. So don't forget, the Russians are very close to the Shiites, and you have the Shiites in northwestern Syria, but you also have about 20 million of them in southwestern Turkey. And if the Turks try to start annihilating the Shiites, I think the Russians will get involved. If the Russians get involved, it could be the end of Turkey. It could be the end of Turkey, the end of Russia also, the end of us, everybody. It's going to completely implode. We have to watch another thing also, and I've been not talking about it for a long time. You have the Christians in Cyprus. You have the Christians in Greece. You have the oil pipelines, and the Turks are not happy about Israel and the Greeks having an independent pipeline to Turkey. So they are almost about to make a big mistake. If the Turks try to interfere with the Israeli-Greek pipeline to Italy, there's going to be a war between Israel and Turkey. That could be the Armageddon War, and I've spoken about this many times. I'm so messed up because of the war that I'm not able to concentrate on the book, on the 8th book that I've been dreaming about, which is the Lepanto 2 and the Turkish Armageddon. Once I was in Coeur d'Alene in Idaho, and Chuck Missler, rest in peace, was talking about Russia being this is the Soviet Empire at the time. So he spoke about the Armageddon being the Russians attacking Israel. And I said, I'm afraid to say that I have to disagree with you, but especially after the collapse of the Soviet system and the breakaway states, 200 million citizens, former citizens of the Soviet Union, are Muslim. And so the Russians are cozying up to them and trying to maintain a good relationship with them. The Russians that are left are not 350 million. The Russians that are left are like 100, 150 million. So if war breaks out with the Greeks and with Israel, we're going to sink their whole fleet again. We did it the Catholics did it in 1571, but the Second Lepanto battle and eventually the defeat of the Turks in Cyprus will be a done deal. The problem is 200 million Turks will go to Turkey to try to attack Israel from the north, probably through the corridor of Western Syria. And that's one of the reasons why Israel strategically cannot move from its present positions on the Lebanese border. Israel has to stay where it is, and it has to buttress the Druze and other allies in the south of Syria. The Druze know their weak position. There are only about 3-4 million Druze in the world. So they are very careful about maintaining a good relationship with Israel because we will not ever harm them. But the other Muslims see the Druze as a group of people that have to be destroyed because they don't say Allahu Akbar, they say Allah, which is God, and they don't talk about Israel being their enemy, and the Arabs are their enemy. Turks are great. I'm not great Turks. I'm getting confused now. The Druze are great, and don't forget that we are family with the Druze because of Moses and Jethro. They know it. We know it. As long as the Syrian government was good to the Druze, they could maintain their special separate relationship. But now it's really separate relationship because Syria now has been taken over by Sunni Muslims who think that the Druze have to be destroyed for saying that Jethro is the greatest prophet, not Muhammad. I hope I haven't confused everyone. I think I confused myself now.
Can I ask what you think about Trudeau stepping down? Because that new guy seems, well, he's not in power yet, but he seems very pro-Israel and very intelligent.
He's a Frenchman, I think.
Hmm?
The replacement for Trudeau's a Frenchman, I think.
And let's hope it happens quick.
Yes. No. Let me tell you, I love Canada. I've been to Canada so many times, but Canada is getting, I mean, it has been getting more and more difficult for me. So much so that I don't consider going to Canada anymore. But if and when we get a pro-Israel leader, and some of these crazy laws, hate speech laws are removed, then I can go back to Canada at some stage. At this stage, America is about big enough for me. Also, Britain has a problem with the anti-Muslim Islamophobia type legislation. I go to the States, I'm very unassuming. I go to my Christian and Messianic groups, and they receive me like family, and I stay with them, and I go from one group to another group. So, like, it's not like I'm setting myself up to be a target with anyone who's anti-Jewish or anti-Christian. And my enemies are anti-Jewish, anti-Christian. But I'm optimistic about Canada. I don't go so far as to say a 51st state, but you never know. Actually, to be fair to Canada, it shouldn't be the 51st state. They should have, I think, they have like 10 provinces. So the provinces should each count as a state. I love Canada.
Can you update us on Gaza, please?
Well, the situation in Gaza, firstly, I have to tell you, we have a problem with our generals. Our generals do what they are told by Washington. So when Netanyahu comes and says to the generals, occupy Gaza, finish this once and for all, they drag their feet. They drag their feet, they drag their feet, they drag their feet, and then it doesn't happen. And we cannot get rid of these generals. We cannot get rid of our Supreme Court justices. We're stuck with some very, very negative elements in the Israeli administration. We have been trying, and Netanyahu is like having to steer the Titanic through a field of ice, ice flows. I'm going to say something I definitely shouldn't say, but so I'm not prime minister, and I don't know if and when I'll ever be prime minister, but I'm a Sovietologist. And the Soviet system is when you have traitors.
A doppelganger. Sorry, I'm listening to my people in Israel, and I was like,
I think somebody should mute themselves until their question comes up, okay? The problem is in Russia in 1917, there was a civil war, a very bloody civil war, which cost a few millions of lives, and the traitors were shot. And Israel, of course, is Jewish, and we don't do those things. But because we don't do these things, the problems persist. And we also have a one world government. I don't know if you want to say based in Washington, D.C. or in London or France or wherever. And all these people are acting against Netanyahu, trying to overthrow him. And to tell you the truth, I take my hat off to Netanyahu that he has not been obliged to use violence against these traitorous elements in the Israeli army and the Israeli government and in the judiciary. So, but in the end, it may be we have no choice. 70% of the population supports Netanyahu, and about 10-15% are these one world government people who think they can get away with it, and they have until now. So I didn't answer your question. What about Gaza? Gaza probably will take 3 months to completely terminate the terrorists. We may lose 100 hostages. The terrorists will all be found. They will all be executed. And anyone who goes with the terrorists will be executed. Maybe that's the beginning of the salvation of Israel. I don't know. But the problem here is the Israeli government is doing everything it can to avoid losing 100 hostages. And so I think in the end, the only solution for the hostages is to pull all the Israeli troops into Gaza and just kill every terrorist. It's not an easy thing to do. Of course, Biden would say don't.
My question is, how is Netanyahu's his health? I know he just had an operation. How's he doing?
Pray for him.
Pray for him. Yes, yes, we pray for him.
The kind of operation he had normally should have good results, but we only know this after the biopsy.
Mm-hmm.
I think they say 85% of all males have these prostate issues.
Yeah, my son had it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not a rare thing. The question is, are these things cancerous? Can they be stopped in time? The same with colonoscopy. Colonoscopy is men and women. And if people have polyps and it's caught in time, they remove the polyps.
Mm-hmm.
But my brother, for example, died of colon cancer, eating too much pork.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, wow.
When I'm in churches and people ask me about pork, I say, listen, Jesus would not touch that.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus says, do not eat these things. And the whole thing about the dream of what's the name of the Roman soldier? who had a dream of the unclean animals being brought down in the
It,
net.
it was Peter's dream.
It was Peter's dream?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the name of the legionnaire? I forget for a moment. Anyway,
Cornelius.
Cornelius, bravo. Thank you very much. The problem is not pork in this dream. The problem in this dream is unclean peoples that the new
Mhm.
disciples had to go out to convert.
Yeah.
I see Bracha has also sent it in. I have to tell you something very strange. I don't want to say I'm having senior moments, but I'm home in Israel 2 years. I'm not preaching out in the churches and going all over the world and everything. And I'm forgetting. I'm forgetting names and places. And for example, I'm going to ask you guys a question. I know this has nothing at all to do with my message, but what was the name of the German philosopher who said that the world is going to have to choose between the foolishness of the Americans and the despotism and tyranny of the Russians? Heinrich Heine. And I forgot Heinrich Heine. And I was in bed. I couldn't sleep the whole night. And in the morning, it came to me. Heinrich Heine was a German philosopher who said 200 years ago, the world will have to choose between the foolishness of the Americans and the despotism and tyranny of the Russians. Then I have another name, which I couldn't remember. Who wrote the book Democracy in America? Democracy in America was written by Alexis de Tocqueville. And this was the last book I read in high school as a senior student in 1966. And it's a boring book, but it's one of the greatest books to understand the greatness of the American people. Because Alexis de Tocqueville said that America will be the greatest country in the world because American pulpits were on fire for the Lord. And said, when America's pulpits are no longer in fire for the Lord, America will lose its preeminence in the world. So I go in the churches, I say, I preach Christianity. America will be the greatest country on earth as long as the pulpits are on fire for the Lord. So, I turn this all into almost like a joke. I say in the churches, I say, yes, Americans are foolish, as Heinrich Heine said, but they are foolish in the Lord. And if you're foolish in the Lord, nobody can defeat you. And this is my message today to the American people also. Biden was working, not that America should be foolish in the Lord, that America should be foolish, period. And that's why Trump won. I've just summarized in about 5 sentences why America is going to remain world power number one. How am I for you, Laurie? I know Laurie is fiddling around doing important things also.
How are you for me?
Yeah, did you hear what I said?
I heard what you said.
That America will be the greatest country on earth because its pulpits are on fire for
Yeah,
the Lord.
we'll see. I mean, if that's a big if. It's a
Yeah, I
big
hope
if.
I hope with incoming President Trump, America will return to being foolish in the Lord.
So, remains to be seen. God will do what he will do with whatever leaders he puts in place and takes down. That's what he
Yeah,
told us.
yeah. So anyway, yes,
Well, so I did have a follow-up on that. You were talking about the generals in Gaza doing what Washington, D.C. says. What about 2 weeks from now, when
well,
Washington, D.C.'s message to them changes?
did you hear Trump today? Trump said today there's not going to be any don't in my message.
Right. So will the Israeli generals follow the new Washington, D.C. directives and then be in line with
I
Netanyahu?
think I think that Netanyahu, if he knows that President Trump is with him, will do what has to be done. As long as Biden is there, we can't touch the generals. We can't touch the Supreme Court justices. There's a group of lawyers that has to be completely taken
Gotcha.
apart in Jerusalem. They also support the one world government. I've been here 55 years in Israel. we have a problem. We have a problem that a small minority will not let go of any of the power. But 70% of the people are the majority that voted for the Likud. And we are the ones who are telling the Supreme Court and the generals to knock it off. So I think we're sitting on the cusp of a volcano ready to explode. And I see there's a message from Neil Johnson. I have not heard of this gentleman. Hudson Taylor. I don't know him. I haven't met him. Hey, listen, my message, people always ask me, how can we pray? I say, God's will be done on earth and in heaven. If this is what happens, this is what I want. Somebody before, I think it was Neil Johnson, was asking about what is the feeling of the American Jews towards Israel. And I think that one of the things we saw in the last few months is with the anti-Semitism in the US now, many Americans, Neil Johnson to me, he said this in 1859. I think that many American Jews are slowly beginning to wake up and understand the threat to the Jews by the anti-Semites in the US and Latin America and other countries. Any more questions? I'm not going anywhere for another 45 minutes, so we have time if you have questions.
Could you tell us a little bit more about you said the Sykes-Picot Treaty 100 years ago that established the borders in the Middle East? Could you just maybe give us a mini history lecture on that?
Well, it's very simple. The Turks were losing their empire. The Turks were known as the sick man of Europe. And insofar as it was a sick man of Europe, the French and the British decided to take a ruler and lay it out over a map of the Middle East and just draw straight lines and say, these are going to be the new countries which we establish. And the new countries had to be led by kings, Hashemite kings. That was Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. Jordan, Iraq, and Syria had Hashemite brothers as kings. They were rapidly executed by their own people. The only one who survived was Abdullah of Jordan, and and his grandson was King Hussein, and his son Abdullah. So don't forget, Jordan is a country of 30% Bedouin from Saudi, who ran away from the House of Saud. If you saw Lawrence of Arabia. And 70% of Jordan is Palestinians, and Lebanon was cut away from Syria. Lebanon was always just part of Syria, and so you have the Shiites, the Sunnis, the Christians, and the Druze, and in Syria you had the same groups and same pretty much the same alliances, and everybody killing everybody. Interestingly, the Druze were always very kind to the Jewish people. And in 1948, the early state of Israel had a very well-known ally known as the Druze. So the Druze of Israel were always in the forefront in Israeli politics and Israeli life. And now the Druze of South Syria want to be part of Israel, and the Druze of the Golan Heights and the Druze of Syria. I don't think the Druze can rely on anyone else other than the Jewish people. And we love the Druze. But the thing is that they drew a line in such a way. I see, I'll come back to it. I see, Lori, you said, well, speaking of Saudi Arabia, what's going on there. I have radical views about Saudi Arabia, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But the point is that the Sykes-Picot Treaty basically was to create new states and to give them to different brothers of the Hashemite family, to let them rule. Saud would be in Saudi Arabia. The Hashemites would be in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. And with all these minorities all hating each other and fighting each other. And Turks were part of Syria, not the Turks, the Kurds were part of Syria, the Kurds were part of Iraq. Iran was not part of the Sykes-Picot. But I'm just saying, I think things are going to change. Regarding Saudi Arabia, since you asked, Lori, I'm going to give you an answer that nobody dares to talk about. But like I said, I'm not Prime Minister of Israel. I'm not a member of Knesset. I'm not this or that minister. I'm not paid by anyone except for donations from people like you. But I think Saudi Arabia is going to, I don't want to say be doomed, but I think the Saudis have a basic problem of the fanaticism of the Sunni Muslims in Saudi Arabia. And MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who's the regent, wants to create a city called Neom, Neo Mustakbal, where the city of, not the city, the real Mount Sinai is, and make a city there, which will be like a Disney World, which will be open to Christians and Jews and people from all over the world to bring tourism to Saudi Arabia. And the very fundamentalist Sunni Saudis consider this blasphemy. And I personally believe that the ISIS people will take over Saudi Arabia, kill MBS, kill his father. And I think the caliphate will be restored in Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And that Israel will be facing a very big problem, because we're going to be facing a problem with Turkey. We're going to be facing a problem with Egypt. We're going to be facing a problem with Saudi Arabia and Jordan. So we have to get ready. We finished the problem pretty much with Gaza. We finished the problem pretty much with Lebanon. We finished the problem pretty much with Syria. Iran is going to be taken care of. So now we have to deal with the next round. It's not that we're looking for it. It's that the insanity in the minds of these Muslims, guided by God to their own destruction, unfortunately. And God will be with us, I think. Lori and my son Aaron post these programs every Tuesday on YouTube, Avi Lipkin. So if you look up Avi Lipkin YouTubes, you can get it. But anyway, so that's the story with Saudi. And the Egyptians hate the Turks. These are two future enemies for Israel. And they're not happy with Saudi, and Saudi's going to eventually have to be dealt with. Yemen eventually will have to be dealt with. So, we're watching all these things. Israel is very much alone, and Israel will have to expand as we're attacked. You all see the link, I hope. And by the way, my YouTubes are all free. We have about 2,000-3,000 viewers every week. Not a big crowd, but you're all welcome to watch. And comment on Tuesdays. Also, don't forget, it's not the same material in many ways, but Brant Fricker with God's Learning Channel, GLC, in Odessa. We do every half hour after this Zoom. I do a Zoom with Brant Fricker, but he seems to have a way of melding my message together with his message, which is about one world government and things in the United States. So if you're interested in that type of thing, then you should watch that too. Are the Islamists inbred? It explains the insanity. I have to say something. I don't know, Lori, if you heard about this, but I heard that one of the problems in the U.S. Air Force training programs is that the Arabs who are inbred cannot be pilots. I don't know if you heard this. The inbreeding of cousins causes some kind of a mental block, which doesn't allow them to be like normal people. Did you hear that, Laurie, that there was a problem with inbreeding?
I have not heard that. That was actually Laura that asked that question.
Oh, okay, but you can ask anyone from the training programs of the U.S. Air Force. And Claire, you're free to talk if you want. It says that explains Malta. So I don't know what the problem in Malta is. Maybe you can elaborate.
Yeah. Well, I think just a lot of inbreeding. Even now, my daughter says about they go out with the cousins, and it's such a small island. I've never been anywhere where the mentality is so weird, even between
Yeah.
themselves, not just with foreigners. It's just weird. It's playing rude and lies. It's like they're called white Arabs. And I've never met a race of people like them. So, yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Mm.
Makes sense. I never heard that before. I just know that the inbreeding, for some reason, there's something in the eyes of the people that they're not able to
Yeah.
function as pilots
Mm.
because of the inbreeding.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're saying about the one world order, you can just feel everything going on around you. I mean, look at this with Keir Starmer. It's crazy in the UK, but it's been crazy over there for years with these grooming gangs and the police actually charging the young white girls. And I've seen it myself. I used to live in the middle of it all. It's one reason I moved out a few times off the UK. And it's just coming to light now, and it's been put like on Elon Musk, and he's calling them out. And I've been seeing all sorts, but it's just in the atmosphere. You can feel it. Obviously, the Antichrist rising up, but it's just crazy things, isn't it? Where it leaves you with your mouth like hanging down. Eh, Twilight Zone.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, there's a very, very dear lady. I won't mention her name, but she lives out near Cambridge, which is like an hour north of London. And uh, in the end, I ended up being her driver because I didn't want to drive on the wrong side of the road. And but she had a very nice car. Her husband died, so she never got a license to drive. So I would do the driving for her. But when I was taking taxis, it was always Pakistani drivers. And I had to be very careful what I was saying and pretend I was, just a normal Joe from the United States. Um, I don't know, when I go to Canada, I drive across the border in my van, and I'm a lot happier because even though I have this crazy Texas license plate, I drive anywhere I want, and I don't talk to anyone, and nobody talks to me. And the Canadians are much friendlier group of people. Even in Vancouver, you have a lot of Chinese and a lot of Hindus, and they're wonderful. I can get along with them. If the subject ever comes up of Islam, I have to tell you, once I was in Ontario and we went to a meeting of different groups. It wasn't specifically Jewish. A very pretty young lady who was Sikh. And she was telling me how terrible the Muslims were. And then I started telling her what I do. And but that was like 20 years ago, a long time ago, when I was in Ontario. But all I can say is I love going to Canada. I don't know if we have time. I think we have time. I have to tell you that when I first started going to Canada and had my books, this was 25 years ago, and they said to me, if you want to import your book to Canada, you have to take out a Canadian importer's license. So here, all of a sudden, I have official documentation that I'm a Canadian importer. That tickled me. I thought that was cute. I paid the tax. It was like a VAT tax. And I did this 2 or 3 times, bringing my materials into Canada. And then one day, one of my friends looked at my book, one of my books, and he said, "Your book talks about Islam. You're going to be on the blacklist because you cannot talk about Islam." And he checked with a very senior customs official in Canada. I said, "Yes, this book has to be banned in Canada." So what happened was I would put all my books, which talk about Islam, in deep in the middle of my car, and at the door, I had books like Israel's Bible Block Party. I had 1 or 2 books, Islam Prophesied. No, not Islam Prophesied in Genesis. I don't know. I have a number of books which were history books, really. And all I had to do was unload the car completely, fill out the import forms, say how much they were worth, and I paid the import tax so that I can go sell them in Canada. And then one day they said to me, each time the situation got worse, they would go check my car to see what I have in my car. And then finally, once I went to the border and they said to me, no, you cannot come into Canada because there was a pastor from New Zealand with a van, camper van, and the US government wouldn't let them into the US. So we're not letting you because you're from the United States. We won't let you into Canada. So I was blocked from going into Canada. So what I did was I had some believers who were living right on the Canadian-US border, just north of Seattle, parked the car, and my Christian friends smuggled me across the border into Canada. I did my lectures and I took a few books with me, and then I went back to the US. But every time I was considering going into Canada, there was something else strange going on that I could not enter Canada. So finally, I don't go to Canada anymore. I don't need for anyone to block me officially and then say, this guy's banned. I didn't need that. The United States has enough churches for me. Anyway, so that's the story about Canada. And I love Canada. I feel almost like I'm going to Switzerland, I want you to know. I love Switzerland too, but I got a 3-year jail sentence in Switzerland. I didn't know if you knew that in 2009, because I said Allah is the devil and Islam is a criminal psychosis and not a religion. So you could find that if you look up Avi Lipkin Schweiz. Schweiz is Switzerland in German. Just look up YouTube, Avi Lipkin Schweiz, and you'll see all the hullabaloo I did there in 2009. And they put me on the map because Chuck Missler was very, very happy to use my talk. I don't know if I could be welcomed even in Malta, because if I get up and say Allah is Satan and Islam is a criminal psychosis, straight to the jail. So
Yeah, Malta's going really against now, and it's going for the other side.
yeah.
So I
And
keep
by the
praying.
way, I have my wife. My wife is my personal jail, so it's okay. Any more questions? I love these salty questions. There's lot to chew on.
How do you spell Svice when you said look up Avi Lipkin? Svice.
SCHWEIZ. Did it pop up?
Yeah, it's in
Once that opens up, you have like 10 or 20 different YouTubes.
yeah, I'll have a look.
Okay, Neil, I see you're leaving. Have a great time. All the best.
This is Annette. I saw another interesting video about Israel, and I can't think of the name. What is the name of the thing that children have? It's like Asperger's. There's another name. I can't think of it. But the army in Israel, they would all send these children a notice that you can't be in the army. But then they found out that later on now they found out that they can do something that nobody else can do on the computer for the army with mapping or something. And now they're hiring, they're bringing in all of them to do this. I thought that was so interesting. It's like Asperger's, but I can't think of the name of it. But that these children have.
I'm trying to remember the name, Frank. Asberg?
Uh, Susan, you know the name of what the children have.
Is either autism or
Autism,
Asperger's?
autism.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
these young men would get a note from the army in Israel that they couldn't be in there because they had autism, but they found out that they have something that nobody else can do. And now they're bringing them into the army and they do something on the computer mapping or something that they help the army. And I thought that was so great because these young men are so happy that they can do this now.
Well, firstly, I have to tell you something, since I do have someone in my family who is autistic.
Me too.
Autistic people are geniuses.
Yeah, yeah,
You just have to know how to unlock it. If you can
right,
unlock it, you've got a genius working for you.
right. Yeah. So I felt so good for these young men that they could be part of the army now. Yeah.
Right, right. By the way, I'm changing the subject a little bit. Look at how the Muslims treat their women.
Mm, yeah.
And here in Israel, women serve full time like everybody else.
Yeah.
And we do not disregard half of our population.
Yeah.
We mobilize everyone and anyone who wants to join the army if it's possible.
Yeah, because I mentioned a couple of weeks ago about those women in the Air Force, those fighter pilots that they took out the Iran's stuff that was very important that they used to make the missiles. These were women in the in the Israeli army that did that. With the men, they had men fighters also, but they were women fighter jets on planes. Yeah. Mm.
No, we're very proud of our women soldiers, of all our population, all our population. So thank you for bringing that up. Very interesting.
Is that a wrap, Avi?
Okay, I think it was as they say in Britain, jolly good show, old chap.
Okay,
Excellent.
we will see you next week. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom,
Shalom,
y'all.
everyone.